think that Deathstroke, Slade Wilson, is a character you really should never root for. He's definitely a villain. I think there's times where people try to play him as a hero or as anti-hero, but to me, he's always been a villain and like one of the best villains that DC has. And he's an enemy of the Teen Titans, and I think he's an enemy of literally legacy for the DCU. And I've always enjoyed writing villains, and I thought there was something to him that was kind of interesting. Like, you kind of look at what Christopher Priest did in the last run, where he was able to play around with all these ideas of who Deathstroke is. And I think the idea of somebody like Slade Wilson suddenly realizing one day, like, I'm a bad person, I think there's something interesting to that of like, what does that person do next? So Slade at the beginning of the story is very much struggling with who he is and what his role moving forward is. He doesn't believe that he is deserving of his family to be around them, but he also doesn't really know what the next steps he's going to take are. He's a little lost. And so when the secret organization called Trust comes to him and they say like, hey, we're going to basically give you money. We're going to pay you to save the world. And so they're coming to him with this. He's like, all right, I understand money. So I'm going to follow this. But in the process of that, the process of working with Trust and trying to quote unquote like save the world with them, it forces him to confront certain parts of himself. And again, it really takes him on this kind of dark journey. And it really makes him deal with the fact that like he's not a hero, regardless of what he wants to do, that is a fantasy and it's never going to happen. And so for him to sort of come to the conclusion that I'm a villain, he also realizes, well, if I'm going to be a villain, I'm going to be the best villain. Black Canary is like one of my favorite characters in the DCU. I've wanted to write them for a long time. They were almost in Robin at one point. And so we kept talking about what we wanted to do with her. And so when this book came up, and I needed someone to essentially be investigating Trust, and we started talking about Birds of Prey and Oracle, and I was, I think Oracle would totally send Black Canary on this mission. And so she plays a balance, like a counterbalance, a contrast with Deathstroke, right? Like, Deathstroke is bad, she is good. She's able to tolerate working with Deathstroke because that's what the mission calls for. Like, she doesn't like him. They have a long history together. They were on Team 7 together. There were missions on Birds of Prey together, but they've fought against each other when she was in the Justice League, and they've had other encounters over the last few years, particularly that they do not get along. I've been a really big fan of Howard Porter's ever since he worked on The Ray with Christopher Priest, and he was Underworld Unleashed with Mark Waid, and then he was on JLA with Grant Morrison, which is like one of the best Justice League books of all time. And I've always wanted to work with him. I was like, well, like, Howard, why don't we try and do something together that is just really big, fun, action, bombastic, like really over the top, like muscle cars, very much this like action book with a lot of explosions in it. And Howard dived at it, and I think it's some of the best work Howard has ever done. They go up against this new version of the Hive, and Howard got to play around with some really creepy, weird horror stuff. We have this horrific moment where we see one of the villains, and it's the Hive King, and he has a hive for a head, and it's just super creepy and weird. And I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, like Howard just really nailed it, and it all looks amazing. I think it's some of the best work Howard has done in years. In issue 1, we reveal that Deathstroke has access to all this bat tech now. And one of the things when we started talking about the opening was I was like, oh, Deathstroke's going to make this like dramatic opening. And either it could be with a motorcycle or a helicopter. Maybe he dives in, like skydives in. And I was like, no, he has all this Batman tech. He should totally drive the Batmobile in, because the idea of Deathstroke driving the Batmobile is so sacrilegious to me. And I know that if Batman was out, knew this was happening, he'd be so pissed off. And it felt so in character with Deathstroke to know, that him driving the Batmobile would piss off Batman. It just made it, extra fun. And so that was part of my thinking in that beginning sequence.